KaraokeBooks.
Uncle Tom's Cabin. Written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Audiobook.
Chapter 6. Discovery. Mr. Dodd and Mrs. Shelby, after their protracted discussion of the night before, did not readily sink to repose, and, in consequence, slept somewhat later than usual, the ensuing morning. "I wonder what keeps Eliza," said Mrs. Shelby, after giving her bell repeated pulls, to no purpose. Mr. Shelby was standing before his dressing glass, sharpening his razor, and just then the door opened, and a colored boy entered, with his shaving water. "Andy," said his mistress, "step to Eliza's door, and tell her I have rung for her 3 times. Poor thing," she added, to herself, with a sigh. Andy soon returned, with eyes very wide in astonishment. "Lor, Mrs. Lizzie's drawers is all open, and her things all lying every which way, and I believe she's just done clar'd out." The truth flashed upon Mr. Shelby and his wife at the same moment. He exclaimed, "Then she suspected it, and she's off." "The Lord be thanked," said Mrs. Shelby. "I trust she is. Wife, you talk like a fool. Really, it will be something pretty awkward for me, if she is. Haley saw that I hesitated about selling this child, and he'll think I connived at it, to get him out of the way. It touches my honor." And Mr. Shelby left the room hastily. There was great running and ejaculating, an opening and shutting of doors, an appearance of faces in all shades of color in different places, for about a quarter of an hour. One person only, who might have shed some light on the matter, was entirely silent, and that was the head cook, Aunt Chloe. Silently, and with a heavy cloud settled down over her once joyous face, she proceeded making out her breakfast biscuits, as if she heard and saw nothing of the excitement around her. Very soon, about a dozen young imps were roosting, like so many crows, on the veranda railings, each one determined to be the first one to apprise the strange masser of his ill luck. "He'll be rail mad, I'll be bound," said Andy. "Won't he swore," said little black Jake. "Yes, for he does swore," said woolly-headed Mandy. "I hearn him yesterday, at dinner. I hearn all about it then, 'cause I got into the closet where Mrs. keeps the great jugs, and I hearn every word." And Mandy, who had never in her life thought of the meaning of a word she had heard, more than a black cat, now took airs of superior wisdom, and strutted about, forgetting to state that, though actually coiled up among the jugs at the time specified, she had been fast asleep all the time. When, at last, Haley appeared, booted and spurred, he was saluted with the bad tidings on every hand. The young imps on the veranda were not disappointed in their hope of hearing him swore, which he did with a fluency and fervency which delighted them all amazingly, as they ducked and dodged hither and thither, to be out of the reach of his riding whip. And, all whooping off together, they tumbled, in a pile of immeasurable giggle, on the withered turf under the veranda, where they kicked up their heels and shouted to their full satisfaction. "If I had the little devils," muttered Haley, between his teeth. "But you ha'n't got 'em, though," said Andy, with a triumphant flourish, and making a string of indescribable mouths at the unfortunate traitor's back, when he was fairly beyond hearing. "I say now, Shelby, this is a most extraordinary business," said Haley, as he abruptly entered the parlor. "It seems that gal's off, with her young un." "Mr. Haley, Mrs. Shelby is present," said Mr. Shelby. "I beg pardon, ma'am," said Haley, bowing slightly, with a still lowering brow, "but still I say, as I said before, this is a singar report." "Is it true, sir?" "Sir," said Mr. Shelby, "if you wish to communicate with me, you must observe something of the decorum of a gentleman. Andy, take Mr. Haley's hat and riding whip. Take a seat, sir." "Yes, sir. I regret to say that the young woman, excited by overhearing, or having reported to her, something of this business, has taken her child in the night, and made off." "I did expect fair dealing in this matter, I confess," said Haley. Well, sir, said Mr. Shelby, turning sharply round upon him, what am I to understand by that remark? If any man calls my honor in question, I have but one answer for him. The traitor cowered at this, and in a somewhat lower tone said that it was plaguey hard on a fellow that had made a fair bargain to be gulled that way. Mr. Haley, said Mr. Shelby, if I did not think you had some cause for disappointment, I should not have borne from you the rude and unceremonious style of your entrance into my parlor this morning. I say thus much, however, since appearances call for it, that I shall allow of no insinuations cast upon me, as if I were at all partner to any unfairness in this matter. Moreover, I shall feel bound to give you every assistance, in the use of horses, servants, and in the recovery of your property. So, in short, Haley, said he, suddenly dropping from the tone of dignified coolness to his ordinary one of easy frankness, the best way for you is to keep good-natured and eat some breakfast, and we will then see what is to be done. Mrs. Shelby now rose, and said her engagements would prevent her being at the breakfast table that morning, and, deputing a very respectable mulatto woman to attend to the gentleman's coffee at the sideboard, she left the room. Old lady don't like your humble servant, over and above, said Haley, with an uneasy effort to be very familiar. I am not accustomed to hear my wife spoken of with such freedom, said Mr. Shelby, dryly. Beg pardon. Of course, only a joke, you know, said Haley, forcing a laugh. Some jokes are less agreeable than others, rejoined Shelby. Devilish free, now I've signed those papers, cuss him, muttered Haley to himself. Quite grand, since yesterday. Never did fall of any prime minister at court occasion wider surges of sensation than the report of Tom's fate among his compeers on the place. It was the topic in every mouth, everywhere, and nothing was done in the house or in the field, but to discuss its probable results. Eliza's flight, an unprecedented event on the place, was also a great accessory in stimulating the general excitement. Black Sam, as he was commonly called, from his being about 3 shades blacker than any other son of ebony on the place, was revolving the matter profoundly in all its phases and bearings, with a comprehensiveness of vision and a strict lookout to his own personal well-being, that would have done credit to any white patriot in Washington. It's an ill wind dat blow nohar, dat are a fact, said Sam, sententiously, giving an additional hoist to his pantaloons, and adroitly substituting a long nail in place of a missing suspender button, with which effort of mechanical genius he seemed highly delighted. Yes, it's an ill wind blows nohar, he repeated. Now, dar, Tom's down, wall, course der's room for some nigger to be up, and why not dis nigger? Dat's de day. Tom, a ridin' round de country, boots blacked, pass in his pocket, all grand as Cuffy, but who he? Now, why shouldn't Sam? Dat's what I want to know. Halloo, Sam, oh Sam. Masser wants you to cotch Bill and Jerry, said Andy, cutting short Sam's soliloquy. Hi. What's afoot now, young un? Why, you don't know, I suppose, that Lizzie's cut stick, and clared out, with her young un? You teach your granny, said Sam, with infinite contempt. Knowed it a heap sight sooner than you did. This nigger ain't so green, now. Well, anyhow, Masser wants Bill and Jerry geared right up, and you and I to go with Masser Haley, to look arter her. Good, now. Dat's de time o' day, said Sam. It's Sam dat's called for in dese times. He's de nigger. See if I don't cotch her, now. Masser'll see what Sam can do. Ah. But, Sam, said Andy, you'd better think twice, for Missus don't want her cotched, and she'll be in wool. Hi, said Sam, opening his eyes. How you know dat? Heard her say so, my own self, dis blessed mornin', when I bring in Masser's shaving water. She sent me to see why Lizzie didn't come to dress her, and when I telled her she was off, she jest ris up, and ses she, the Lord be praised. And Masser, he seemed rail mad, and ses he, wife, you talk like a fool. But lor, she'll bring him too. I knows well enough how that'll be, it's allers best to stand Mrs. side the fence, now I tell 'er. Black Sam, upon this, scratched his woolly pate, which, if it did not contain very profound wisdom, still contained a great deal of a particular species much in demand among politicians of all complexions and countries, and vulgarly denominated, knowing which side the bread is buttered. So, stopping with grave consideration, he again gave a hitch to his pantaloons, which was his regularly organized method of assisting his mental perplexities. "Der and no saying, never, 'bout no kind o' thing in dis world," he said, at last. Sam spoke like a philosopher, emphasizing this, as if he had had a large experience in different sorts of worlds, and therefore had come to his conclusions advisedly. Now, sartin I'd 'a said that Mrs. would 'a scoured the varsal world after Lizzie, added Sam, thoughtfully. So she would, said Andy, but can't ye see through a ladder, ye black nigger? Mrs. don't want dis Masser Haley to get Lizzie's boy, dat's de go. Hi, said Sam, with an indescribable intonation, known only to those who have heard it among the negroes. And I'll tell more'n all, said Andy, I specs you'd better be making tracks for dem hosses, mighty sudden, too, for I hearn Mrs. Kieran arter so you've stood foolin' long enough. Sam, upon this, began to bestir himself in real earnest, and after a while appeared, bearing down gloriously towards the house, with Bill and Jerry in a full canter, and adroitly throwing himself off before they had any idea of stopping, he brought them up alongside of the horse-post like a tornado. Haley's horse, which was a skittish young colt, winced, and bounced, and pulled hard at his halter. Ho, ho, said Sam, skeery, are ye? And his black visage lighted up with a curious, mischievous gleam. I'll fix ye now, said he. There was a large beech tree overshadowing the place, and the small, sharp, triangular beech nuts lay scattered thickly on the ground. With one of these in his fingers, Sam approached the colt, stroked and patted, and seemed apparently busy in soothing his agitation. On pretense of adjusting the saddle, he adroitly slipped under it the sharp little nut, in such a manner that the least weight brought upon the saddle would annoy the nervous sensibilities of the animal, without leaving any perceptible graze or wound. Dar, he said, rolling his eyes with an approving grin, me fix 'em. At this moment Mrs. Shelby appeared on the balcony, beckoning to him. Sam approached with as good a determination to pay court as did ever suitor after a vacant place at St. James's or Washington. Why have you been loitering so, Sam? I sent Andy to tell you to hurry. Lord bless you, Mrs., said Sam, horses won't be cotched all in a minute. They'd done clared out way down to the south pasture, and the Lord knows war. Sam, how often must I tell you not to say, Lord bless you, and the Lord knows, and such things? It's wicked. Oh, Lord bless my soul. I done forgot, Mrs. I won't say nothing of dis sort no more. Why, Sam, you just have said it again. Did I? Oh, Lord. I mean, I didn't go fur to say it. You must be careful, Sam. Just let me get my breath, Mrs., and I'll start fair. I'll be very careful. Well, Sam, you are to go with Mr. Haley, to show him the road, and help him. Be careful of the horses, Sam. You know Jerry was a little lame last week. Don't ride them too fast. Mrs. Shelby spoke the last words with a low voice, and strong emphasis. Let dis child alone for dat, said Sam, rolling up his eyes with a volume of meaning. Lord knows. Hi. Didn't say dat, said he, suddenly catching his breath, with a ludicrous flourish of apprehension, which made his mistress laugh, spite of herself. Yes, Mrs., I'll look out for de hosses. Now, Andy, said Sam, returning to his stand under the beech trees, you see I wouldn't be all surprised if dat gentleman's critter should gib a fling, by and by, when he comes to be a gettin' up. You know, Andy, critters will do such things. and therewith Sam poked Andy in the side, in a highly suggestive manner. "Hi," said Andy, with an air of instant appreciation. "Yes, you see, Andy, Mrs. wants to make time, dat ars clar to der most ordinary server. I gees make a little for her. Now, you see, get all desse hosses loose, caperin permiscus round dis lot and down to de wood dar, and I spec masser won't be off in a hurry." Andy grinned. See," said Sam, see, Andy, if any such thing should happen as that Masser Haley's horse should begin to act contrary, and cut up, you and I just let's go of our'n to help him, and we'll help him, oh yes." And Sam and Andy laid their heads back on their shoulders, and broke into a low, immoderate laugh, snapping their fingers and flourishing their heels with exquisite delight. At this instant, Haley appeared on the veranda. Somewhat mollified by certain cups of very good coffee, he came out smiling and talking, in tolerably restored humor. Sam and Andy, clawing for certain fragmentary palm leaves, which they were in the habit of considering as hats, flew to the horse-posts, to be ready to help Masser. Sam's palm leaf had been ingeniously disentangled from all pretensions to braid, as respects its brim, and the slivers starting apart, and standing upright, gave it a blazing air of freedom and defiance, quite equal to that of any Fiji chief. While the whole brim of Andy's being departed bodily, he rapped the crown on his head with a dexterous thump, and looked about well pleased, as if to say, "Who says I haven't got a hat?" "Well, boys," said Haley, "look alive now, we must lose no time." "Not a bit of him, Masser," said Sam, putting Haley's rein in his hand, and holding his stirrup, while Andy was untying the other two horses. The instant Haley touched the saddle, the mettlesome creature bounded from the earth with a sudden spring, that threw his master sprawling, some feet off, on the soft, dry turf. Sam, with frantic ejaculations, made a dive at the reins, but only succeeded in brushing the blazing palm leaf afore named into the horse's eyes, which by no means tended to allay the confusion of his nerves. So, with great vehemence, he overturned Sam, and, giving 2 or 3 contemptuous snorts, flourished his heels vigorously in the air, and was soon prancing away towards the lower end of the lawn, followed by Bill and Jerry, whom Andy had not failed to let loose, according to contract, speeding them off with various direful ejaculations. And now ensued a miscellaneous scene of confusion. Sam and Andy ran and shouted, dogs barked here and there, and Mike, Mose, Mandy, Fanny, and all the smaller specimens on the place, both male and female, raced, clapped hands, whooped, and shouted, with outrageous officiousness and untiring zeal. Haley's horse, which was a white one, and very fleet and spirited, appeared to enter into the spirit of the scene with great gusto, and having for his coursing ground a lawn of nearly half a mile in extent, gently sloping down on every side into indefinite woodland, he appeared to take infinite delight in seeing how near he could allow his pursuers to approach him, and then, when within a hand's breadth, whisk off with a start and a snort, like a mischievous beast as he was, and career far down into some alley of the wood-lot. Nothing was further from Sam's mind than to have any one of the troop taken until such season as should seem to him most befitting, and the exertions that he made were certainly most heroic. Like the sword of Coeur de Lion, which always blazed in the front and thickest of the battle, Sam's palm leaf was to be seen everywhere when there was the least danger that a horse could be caught. There he would bear down full tilt, shouting, "Now for it! Catch him! Catch him!" in a way that would set everything to indiscriminate rout in a moment. Haley ran up and down, and cursed and swore and stamped miscellaneously. Mr. Shelby in vain tried to shout directions from the balcony, and Mrs. Shelby from her chamber window alternately laughed and wondered, not without some inkling of what lay at the bottom of all this confusion. At last, about 12 o'clock, Sam appeared triumphant, mounted on Jerry, with Haley's horse by his side, reeking with sweat, but with flashing eyes and dilated nostrils, showing that the spirit of freedom had not yet entirely subsided. He's cotched, he exclaimed, triumphantly. If T hadn't been for me, they might have bust themselves, all on 'em, but I cotched him. You, growled Haley, in no amiable mood. If it hadn't been for you, this never would have happened. Lord bless us, masser, said Sam, in a tone of the deepest concern, and me that has been racin' and chasin' till the sweat jest pours off me. Well, well, said Haley, you've lost me near 3 hours, with your cursed nonsense. Now let's be off, and have no more fooling. Why, masser, said Sam, in a deprecating tone, I believe you mean to kill us all clar, horses and all. Here we are all just ready to drop down, and the critters all in a reek of sweat. Why, masser won't think of startin' on now till arter dinner. Masser's hoss wants rubbin' down. See how he splashed hisself, and Jerry limps too. Don't think missus would be willin' to have us start dis way, no how. Lord bless you, masser, we can catch up, if we do stop. Lizzie never was no great of a walker. Mrs. Shelby, who, greatly to her amusement, had overheard this conversation from the veranda, now resolved to do her part. She came forward, and, courteously expressing her concern for Haley's accident, pressed him to stay to dinner, saying that the cook should bring it on the table immediately. Thus, all things considered, Haley, with rather an equivocal grace, proceeded to the parlor, while Sam, rolling his eyes after him with unutterable meaning, proceeded gravely with the horses to the stable yard. Did see him, Andy? Did see him? Said Sam, when he had got fairly beyond the shelter of the barn, and fastened the horse to a post. Oh, lor, if it warn't as good as a meetin', now, to see him a-dancin' and kickin' and swearin' at us. Didn't I hear him? Swore away, old fellow, says I to myself. Will have hoss now, or wait till you cotch him? Says I. Lor, Andy, I think I can see him now. And Sam and Andy leaned up against the barn and laughed to their heart's content. Oughter seen how mad he looked, when I brought the hoss up. Lord, he'd a killed me, if he yours too, and there I was a-standin' as innercent and as humble. Lor, I seed you, said Andy. Ain't you an old hoss, Sam? Rather specs I am, said Sam. Did see Mrs. Upstairs at the winder? I seed her laughin'. I'm sure, I was racin' so, I didn't see nothing, said Andy. Well, see, said Sam, proceeding gravely to wash down Haley's pony, I say, quired what may call a habit of observation, Andy. It's a very 'portant habit, Andy, and I commend to be cultivatin' it, now young. Hist up that hind foot, Andy. See, Andy, it's bobservation makes all de difference in niggers. Didn't I see which way the wind blew dis mornin'? Didn't I see what missus wanted, though she never let on? Dat ar's bobservation, Andy. I spects it's what you may call a faculty. Faculties is different in different peoples, but cultivation of 'em goes a great way. I guess if I hadn't helped your bobservation dis mornin', wouldn't have seen your way so smart, said Andy. Andy, said Sam, you's a promisin' child, der ain't no manner o' doubt. I thinks lots of Andy, and I don't feel no ways ashamed to take days from you. We oughtanter overlook nobody, Andy, 'cause the smartest on us gets tripped up sometimes. And so, Andy, let's go up to the house now. I'll be boned, Missis'll give us an uncommon good bite, dis time.
KaraokeBooks.